Hello, and welcome to episode 13 of Arbiter of Worlds, where we discuss the art and science of game mastering tabletop RPGs. If you're new to the channel, I hope you'll stick around and join in the community we're creating, and if you're a returning subscriber, thanks for supporting the channel. In last week's episode, we discussed why you should run long-term RPG campaigns. To briefly recap, long-term RPG campaigns offer the best experience you can have playing and running RPGs, because the opportunity to enjoy heroes' journeys strengthened by cumulative return on cumulative investment across multiple styles of play. A long-term campaign is the apex and acme of RPG excellence. The problem, of course, is that running a long-term RPG campaign is hard. So in this episode, I'm going to share how you do it. While a lot of our earlier episodes have discussed issues of theory and philosophy, this episode is actually going to be very pragmatic and hands-on. This is a how-to video, not a why should video. Now, the first step towards running a successful long-term campaign is scheduling for success. The gold standard here is St. Gary Gygax himself. During the heady days of Greyhawk, Gary used to run his campaign 6 days out of 7. And he did that while writing not just the campaign, but all of the rules, spells, and content that became AD&D. Now, in today's world, it's hard to be as hardcore as Gary. Nevertheless, steady play is essential to sustain a long-term campaign. The most sustainable schedule for a long-term RPG campaign is either weekly or fortnightly. Successful RPG campaigns are sustained by commitment, by the sense that it's all real, and that requires ongoing reinforcement of the activities. Campaigns are similar to TV shows in that they require an ongoing immersion in the imaginary world, and 2 weeks seems to be about the longest length of time most people can be away from their imaginary world without losing track of what's going on. 1 week is even better. It keeps it even fresher in their mind. In my experience, you will not succeed in running a long-term campaign if the sessions are less frequent than once per 2 weeks. Now, the single biggest obstacle towards running RPGs on a weekly or fortnightly basis is the false belief that maintaining a weekly game is impossible in today's world because we're all too busy. But most of us are not, in fact, too busy. The real reason we seem too busy for a long-term campaign is just because we have more options for things to do. We live in the future. And in the future, people have access to mobile phones, on-demand movies, endless video games, nonstop social media, and more. But consider, the average casual video gamer is playing 20 hours per week. The average person watches 33 hours of television per week. A dedicated World of Warcraft gamer who raids twice per week and grinds the other nights spends 40 hours per week in his game. Consider the time spent by dedicated golfers who hit the course every weekend, or by ESPN enthusiasts who watch sports daily, plus all-day Sunday as a major social gathering. In contrast to these 20 to 40-hour commitments, running a successful RPG campaign takes about 5 hours once a week from the player, and at most another 8 to 10 hours of prep time each week from the GM. Any of the hobbyists above would have more than enough leisure time to run a weekly RPG campaign if they wanted to. So if you're like most people, the real question is not, do I have the time? It's really, is this actually one of the things I want to make a priority with my time? And if the answer is yes, stay with me. If the answer is no, stop watching now. You're better off running casual one-offs than attempting a major campaign. It's your choice. I've made my choice because, in my opinion, the reward of running and playing in a long-term campaign more than outweighs the reward of time spent in an MMO or TV show or watching sports for all the reasons I explained last episode. So the second step to succeeding in a long-term campaign is having the right number of players. How many players should you invite for long-term success? Now, the population of GMs is sadly rather unevenly distributed, and as a result, some game masters struggle to find even 1 or 2 players, and others run the only game in town and have to limit their players to a manageable number. Acknowledging that reality, there is still a definite sweet spot for how many players you should aim for. And that sweet spot is between 3 and 7, with 5 being the ideal. Now, why do I say 5 players is the ideal number? First, with 5 players, you have enough for the players to cover most of the core niches or core classes without so many players that it damages the game. You can give each player sufficient in-game attention without slowing the game down. And if you're playing face-to-face in terms of seating, most dinner tables have 6 seats, meaning there's 1 for the GM and 5 for the players. But the main reason you want to have at least 5 players is because of absences. Having a large group means you can absorb some absences and attrition and still play the game. Having 5 players means you can still play even if a couple folks are missing. We're going to talk about this more later. Now, if you're one of the lucky GMs who has access to an even wider pool of gamers, you can certainly run with more than 7. It will slow down the game a bit. I myself have run groups as large as 14, and we would then play when at least 8 players could come to the session. Now, the third, and perhaps the most important step in running a successful long-term campaign is to properly explain what the players are signing up for. You need to explain to your friends that you are not hosting a series of social events. You are starting an intramural sports team and asking them if they'd like to be on the team. Now, it's true, role-playing games are like social events and that some of the fun is socializing with your friends, but the problem with treating an RPG as a social event is that the etiquette of social events does not lend itself to RPGs at all. Consider the notion of fashionably late at a social event, where you demonstrate your high social status by not bothering to show up until the event is already underway. That is ruinous to an RPG, which can't start if people are missing. Or consider the notion of stopping by a social event, where you put 2 or 3 events on the schedule and you visit each one for a portion of the time. Again, that's ruinous to an RPG, which requires sustained attention. Or even consider blowing off a social event where you simply don't attend because something better came up. That's the worst crime you can commit as an RPG player. You can throw a party for guests who behave that way, but you cannot run an RPG when the players are going to be fashionably late, stopping by, or blowing it off. Which is why you need to position joining the campaign is like joining a sports team. People can often have trouble understanding why they need to show up on time and stay through the end at a social event. But everyone understands that the quarterback needs to show up at the football game and finish the game. Many, if not all people, have been on an intramural sports team at one point in their life. And so it's a simple analogy for them to understand. But more importantly, it puts into perspective the time commitment. A player who balks at committing to your campaign as an intramural sport is a player who's going to miss a lot of sessions. And that's important because missing sessions is one of the worst things a player can do to a campaign. Now, even with the most well-intentioned and dedicated players, there will be times when one or more of them can't make it. An ongoing challenge for every ACKS judge is what to do when one or more players go missing in action. On the web, you can find recommendations ranging from canceling the game to running with the missing player's characters killed and everything seen in between. All of these recommendations are wrong. The first thing you need to know is you do not cancel the game. The game must go on. As long as you have more than half of your group available, so 3 players out of 5, for instance, 4 players out of 7, the game goes on. The number one reason that most long-term campaigns fail is because they ignore this rule. Pragmatically, in any regular campaign, there are going to be 1 or 2 absent players in any given session due to work, illness, travel, kids. If you cancel whenever 1 or 2 people are missing, then you end up canceling more often than you're running. Philosophically, this is why the campaign should be larger than any one player or any one faction of players. If you cancel because of someone else's decision that they can't or won't come play, then you've handed over control of the destiny of your campaign to that person, and it won't work. Now, there's no hard and fast rule about what you should do with the missing players' characters. It really is going to depend on the style of game you're running. If you're running a collective, cooperative game, then let the attending players run their friends' player characters and give everyone full experience points so they all still stay together on the advancement curve. If you're running more of a competitive group, then you should NPC the missing player characters and award them a limited experience award, like their henchmen. If you're running a truly individualistic or chaotic group, then the missing player characters are absent pursuing other agendas or present as NPCs, and they don't get any experience. But whatever rule you choose, you have to stick with it and apply the consequences fairly. If Bob misses a session and Jim runs his PC while he's gone, and Bob's PC dies, that's how it is. The game goes on. If Jim misses a session and nobody runs his PC and he loses out on tons of experience points, that's how it is. The game goes on. These methods are what I use in practice, and they work very well. For instance, in my weekly campaign with 7 players, we play if there are at least 4 players available, hell or high water. The attending players run the missing player characters if they're away. This is a simple rule. There are a lot of ways to screw it up. For instance, sometimes the GM has this one particular player that he really enjoys having in the sessions. And if that player can't make it, the GM is tempted to cancel the game. That's a mistake. Sometimes the group plays at a particular player's house, and if that player is unavailable, the temptation is to cancel the game. And that's honestly a good reason to run the game from your own home or to have a backup like a game store, because the game must go on. Now, none of the advice above is going to sustain a campaign alone. You must sustain it. As the GM, you are the heart and soul of the group. If you show up late, you can't expect the players to show up on time. If you don't put the time in between sessions into prepping the game, you can't expect them to bother to remember what went on last session. If you cancel the game because you have a tummy ache, and you can't expect your players to have any more commitment. But if you do have the commitment, running a long-term campaign is one of the most satisfying experiences you can enjoy. It's the sort of experience that the advice in this channel is designed to help you create, and one that I hope you'll pursue with gusto. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons. We'll see you next week.